Reed Mitchell was never one to believe in the supernatural or in things that couldn't be explained by science. As a former Marine-turned-tech specialist, he was grounded in logic, facts, and numbers. But there was something about her that he couldn't shake. She wasn't a ghost, not by any means, but she was always there, lurking in the background of his life like a shadow that refused to leave. Reed had first noticed her when he was just a boy, standing at the edge of his school playground, always at a distance, but always watching him. He couldn't remember her face clearly, and the few times he thought he caught a glimpse of it, it was either blurred or obscured. It seemed impossible that someone could be everywhere he went, yet he couldn't seem to get rid of the feeling that she was. It was a presence he felt more than saw. Years passed, and Reed's life became a whirlwind of military training, then civilian life in the fast-paced world of technology. Every now and then, his mind would wander back to that woman, Lyra, as he would later come to call her, though he didn't know why. It felt right, like he'd known her name before. He saw her in the corner of his eye, in the streets of the city, in a crowd at a concert, or on the subway during his late-night rides home from work. Every time, she was at a distance, just watching, like an ever-present observer. But when he tried to approach, she would vanish. It was as if she was a mirage, never truly there when he reached out for her. There was no way he could explain it. Reed chalked it up to paranoia, to stress from his high-stakes job in a tech company that dealt with military contracts. But deep down, a gnawing feeling began to take hold of him. He couldn't escape the idea that the woman had been watching him for years, even since his time in the military. That thought haunted him. Why her? What was the purpose of it all? The more he thought about it, the more his curiosity grew. Was she just a random figure in his life, or was there something more? His obsession with her grew to a point where it began affecting his day-to-day life. Reed started searching for any clue that might explain her presence. Old photos from his childhood, files from his time in the military, even his recent photos. Every time, there she was, slipping into the background, as if she was always one step ahead of him. It was as if she knew everything about him. He had become obsessed. One day, while reviewing some old surveillance footage of a high-profile military exercise he'd been a part of, Reed's eyes widened in shock. There she was again. This time, clearer than ever. Lyra, standing on the outskirts of the area, hidden from the cameras, but unmistakably there. He hadn't seen her before, but the footage didn't lie. His heart pounded in his chest. Was she a spy, a government agent, an enemy from the past? The questions flooded his mind, and the only way to find answers was to confront her. Reed dug deeper, scouring every bit of data he could find about her, reaching out to his old contacts in the military for any clue about her identity. There was no information. It was as if she didn't exist, except for in his mind. The more he tried to rationalize it, the more confused and frustrated he became. That was when he realized he couldn't run from it any longer. He had to find her, no matter the cost. He wasn't sure why, but something told him that finding Lyra was no longer just a matter of curiosity. It was a mission, and whatever answers she held, he was determined to uncover them. Little did Reed know, his search for the truth would lead him down a path that would change everything he knew about himself, the world, and the universe. Lyra had been watching for a reason, and that reason was far more significant than anything Reed could have ever imagined. The adventure was just beginning. Reed's search for answers had consumed him. For weeks, he scoured old footage, analyzed photographs, and followed every lead he could find. But each time, Lyra eluded him, vanishing like smoke in the wind whenever he thought he was close. He couldn't ignore the fact that something was wrong. She wasn't just an ordinary person. There was an air of mystery surrounding her that only deepened the more he investigated. His obsession with finding her grew, and soon, it wasn't just about curiosity anymore. Something deep inside Reed told him he had to find her, because when he did, his life would change forever. One night, Reed's search took him to an abandoned facility on the outskirts of the city. It was a place he had never noticed before, tucked away behind a cluster of dilapidated buildings and overgrown trees. There was no reason to be there, not unless you were looking for something. Reed had a gut feeling Lyra would be there. His heart raced as he parked his car in front of the crumbling structure, a cold wind sweeping through the empty street. The place seemed deserted, but something about it made his skin prickle with unease. He stepped out of the car and slowly approached the building. The air felt thick, almost heavy, as if the world was holding its breath. He pushed open the rusted door, which creaked loudly in the silence, and stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of streetlights from outside. As Reed made his way through the corridors, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. The sound of his footsteps echoed off the cold concrete walls, but nothing else moved. He turned a corner, and there she was. Lyra stood at the far end of the hallway, facing away from him, her long coat fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her presence felt like a force of nature, pulling him in, and Reed's breath caught in his chest. He had found her at last. But there was no time to celebrate. Before Reed could say a word, she turned toward him, and his heart skipped a beat. Lyra's eyes were striking, a deep shade of silver, with a glow that almost seemed otherworldly. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was something in her gaze that told Reed she knew more about him than he could ever understand. It wasn't anger or suspicion. It was something else. Understanding, maybe. She had been watching him for so long, but now the time had come for her to reveal the truth. "You've been looking for me," Lyra said, her voice soft yet firm. "And now you found me." Her words were not a question, but a statement of fact. She knew why he was here. She had been expecting him, just like she had been expecting him all those years. Reed stood frozen for a moment, trying to find the words, but they wouldn't come. How could he possibly ask the questions that had been building inside him for so long? Who was she? Why had she been watching him? And most importantly, why did she seem so familiar? Lyra seemed to sense his confusion and gave him a small, almost comforting smile. "I know you have many questions, but first, let me explain why I've been watching you." She paused, stepping closer, her eyes never leaving his. "My people have been observing Earth for a long time. We've seen your potential, Reed. You're not just a man. You are someone who will change the course of history, whether you're ready for it or not." Reed took a step back, his mind spinning with her words. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small glowing device. It hummed softly in her hand, like it was alive. She held it out to him. "This is just the beginning," she said. "The reason I've been watching you is because of your role in what's coming. There's a war coming, Reed. A war that could destroy everything you know. And you." She stopped, looking at him with intensity. "You are the key to stopping it." Reed's pulse quickened. A war. A key. His mind was racing, but all he could do was stare at the device in her hand, the glow from it flickering like a warning. It was too much, too impossible. But deep down, Reed knew one thing for sure: his life would never be the same again. Lyra had been watching him for years, but now everything was about to change. He could feel it in his bones. The truth was out there, and he had no choice but to face it. Reed stood still, the words Lyra had just spoken echoing in his mind. "You are the key to stopping a war." He could hardly comprehend what she was saying. It felt like his life had just been flipped upside down in an instant. He had gone from a regular tech specialist, living his ordinary life, to being at the center of a galactic conflict he hadn't even known existed. The weight of it all pressed down on him. A war. What war? He asked, still trying to piece together the puzzle in his mind. Lyra didn't waste time answering. She walked a few steps forward, holding the glowing device in her hand, and looked directly into Reed's eyes. "It's a war between my people, the Icorians, and an empire that has been spreading chaos across the galaxy. They are known as the Orlok, and their reach is vast. They have destroyed countless worlds, and now they've set their sights on Earth. Reed's heart skipped a beat. Earth? He had always thought of his planet as just one small, unimportant piece of the universe. But now he was hearing that there were forces out there, races he never even imagined, and they were coming for them. The Orlok are ruthless, Lyra continued, her voice steady, but filled with a tension Reed could feel. They've been planning this for years, watching Earth from the shadows. And for a long time, we, the Icorians, have been waiting for someone like you, to rise up and stop them. You, Reed, are the descendant of an ancient line that was chosen to lead humanity into this war. Your bloodline holds the power we need to defeat them. Reed's mind raced. His bloodline. Chosen. He wasn't some hero. He was just a man who had spent his days coding, fixing machines, and navigating through life without ever suspecting he had some grand purpose waiting for him. But now, the pieces were starting to fall into place. He remembered the strange pull he had always felt toward Lyra, as if something deep inside him recognized her, even before he understood who she was. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. So, you've been watching me all these years because you knew I was. What? The leader? Reed asked, his voice shaky as he tried to wrap his head around it. Lyra nodded, her expression serious. Yes, I've been watching, waiting. You've had a role to play, but you weren't ready. Not until now. The Orlok have begun their advance, and the time to act is upon us. She stepped closer, handing him the glowing device. This is a key to unlocking your potential, Reed. It will help you tap into the power within you. The power your bloodline carries. But you must understand, once you accept this, there is no going back. The fate of Earth, of humanity, will rest on your shoulders. Reed stared at the device in his hand, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling on him. The truth was too overwhelming. He had always been a man of logic, of science, but what Lyra was saying couldn't be explained by anything he knew. It felt like a dream, a nightmare, but everything around him, the glowing device, the sense of urgency in Lyra's voice, told him it was real. This was happening, whether he was ready or not. What happens next? He asked quietly, still grappling with the enormity of it all. We train, Lyra replied. We prepare you for what's to come. The Orlok won't hesitate. They'll send their forces to Earth, and when they do, we must be ready. She paused, giving him a look that Reed couldn't quite decipher. But it's not just about fighting, Reed. This is about unity. About forging alliances with other races. The war won't be won by strength alone. You'll need to lead, to inspire, and to show humanity that they are not just helpless in the face of a greater power. Reed's mind was still reeling. Lead humanity. Inspire others. He was no hero, no leader. He was just a man who had lived his life, trying to make sense of the world. But deep down, something stirred in him, a feeling, a sense of destiny. Maybe, just maybe, this was the purpose he had been searching for, even if he hadn't known it until now. Lyra seemed to sense his hesitation. I know this is a lot to process, but you're not alone in this. I'll be with you every step of the way. She gave him a reassuring look, one that filled him with a strange sense of hope. You're ready, Reed. You've always been ready. Reed looked at the device in his hand again, feeling the strange energy pulsing from it. There was no turning back now. He had a choice, to step forward and embrace this destiny, or to walk away and risk everything. His heart raced as he made the decision. He was in this now. There was no going back. Reed couldn't believe how quickly everything was happening. Only days ago, he was just a regular guy, trying to make a living. Now he was being told that the fate of the entire planet rested on his shoulders, and to make matters more overwhelming, Lyra had promised him training to unlock the power inside him, a power he never knew he had. It was hard to swallow, but deep inside, Reed felt a spark of determination. This wasn't a chance he could let slip by. The Orlok were coming, and Earth needed someone to step up. If not him, then who? Over the next few weeks, Lyra began his training. It wasn't like anything Reed had ever experienced. There was no formal structure, no classroom with dry lessons or theory. It was a grueling, hands-on experience. Every morning, he would meet Lyra in a hidden underground location, a safe house that Lyra had established long ago for the purpose of training humans who were destined to fight. The training room was a mix of high-tech equipment and ancient tools, symbols of the Icorians' long history. Reed would start with basic physical exercises, sprints, strength training, hand-to-hand combat. But he could tell this was only the beginning. The real challenge came when they moved on to more advanced techniques. Lyra introduced him to the device she had given him, a sleek, glowing piece of technology that seemed to hum with an energy that wasn't of this world. She explained that it was a key, a conduit to unlocking his powers. At first, it felt foreign, uncomfortable even, as Reed tried to connect with the energy inside it. He could barely feel anything, and frustration began to set in. "It's not working," he said, his voice edged with irritation. Lyra remained calm, as always. "You're trying to force it, Reed. It won't work that way." She sat beside him, her eyes watching him intently. "You need to trust it. You need to trust yourself." It was then that Reed realized what she meant. This wasn't about brute force or skill. It was about unlocking something deep within himself, something that had always been there, but was waiting for the right moment to emerge. Days turned into weeks, and slowly Reed began to feel the shift. His senses sharpened, his reflexes quickened, and the power inside the device started to hum louder and louder. But it wasn't just physical training. Lyra taught him about the history of the Icorians, their people, and why they had chosen him. She showed him the devastating effects of the Orlok's previous conquests. She told him stories of worlds that had been torn apart, civilizations that had been wiped out. The stakes were high, and Reed felt the pressure mounting. But what pushed him forward wasn't just the fear of the Orlok. It was the responsibility to protect everything he had ever known. His friends, his family, his planet. Lyra's teachings weren't just about war, they were about unity. The power Reed was learning to harness wasn't just his own. It was the strength of the human race, the collective will to survive and thrive against all odds. But as Reed grew stronger, he began to notice something unsettling. Strange occurrences were happening around him. Visions, flashes of images that didn't make sense. He saw vast star systems burning, cities falling, and strange alien symbols he couldn't recognize. It wasn't just the power inside him. It was as if the device was showing him something, or someone. "Lyra," he asked one evening, his voice shaky, "what's happening to me?" Lyra paused, then walked over to him, her expression unreadable. "You're seeing the future, Reed," she said quietly. "The power inside you connects you to the past, present, and future. It's how the Icorians see the universe. What you're experiencing are glimpses of what could come, what the Orlok will do if they aren't stopped." Reed stared at her, his mind reeling. It wasn't just training anymore. This was real. The war wasn't something that might happen someday. It was happening now, and he was in the middle of it. The visions didn't stop. If anything, they grew more intense, more vivid. Reed began to understand them, piece by piece. They weren't just random flashes. They were messages, warnings. And they were leading him to something. To someone. He had no idea who or what it was, but the connection between him and the visions was undeniable. They were guiding him, preparing him for the war to come. But as Reed focused on these visions, he also realized something crucial. He wasn't alone in this fight. Lyra was his ally, his guide, but he needed to unite other forces, to rally the humans who had no idea what was about to unfold. He couldn't do this alone. He had to find others who believed in the cause, who were willing to fight. The battle for Earth was coming, and it was time to get ready. Reed felt the weight of it all. He was no longer just a man looking for answers. He was a leader, a protector, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Reed stood at the edge of the underground training facility, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come a long way since that first day Lyra had revealed the truth to him. The power inside him was growing stronger by the day, and so were his instincts. He could feel the shift within himself, like something deep within was awakening. He had become more than just a man. He had become a symbol, a leader. But with that responsibility came fear. The weight of the world felt heavier than ever. Lyra had warned him that the Orlok would come for Earth soon, and every day that passed without preparation made Reed's anxiety grow. "We need to act now," Reed said, his voice firm but filled with urgency. He had been training, meditating, and learning everything Lyra had to offer. But he knew it wasn't enough. He had to gather support, unite humanity, and prepare them for the war that was coming. Lyra had taught him much, but one lesson stood out above all others. Humans had the potential to be more than they realized. The power that Reed had tapped into wasn't just his, it was humanity's. But they had to believe it. They had to see that they weren't helpless in the face of the Orlok's destruction. Lyra was standing beside him, her face thoughtful. "You're right," she said after a long pause. "We can't wait any longer, but this won't be easy. The Orlok are powerful, and they've infiltrated every corner of the galaxy. You'll need more than just raw power. You'll need strategy, alliances, and trust." Reed nodded. He had already begun to formulate a plan. He had reached out to some of his old contacts from the military and tech world, people who might believe in the cause. But the truth was, most of the world had no idea what was coming. Earth had always been isolated, shielded from the larger galactic conflicts. The idea that an alien empire might invade seemed impossible, a fantasy. But Reed knew better now. He had seen the truth, and he had to make others see it too. That night, Reed gathered a small group of trusted allies, old friends, military leaders, and a few key tech experts who had come to trust him over the years. They met in a discreet location, a secure building that Reed had arranged for their first meeting. As the group gathered, Reed felt a sense of weight settling on him. These were the first people he would lead. These were the people who would fight beside him in the coming war. He had no idea what they would say, but he knew they needed to hear the truth. "Thank you for coming," Reed began, his voice steady as he addressed the group. "I know this sounds crazy, but you have to trust me. The fate of Earth is at stake. There's an alien empire called the Orlok, and they've been planning an invasion of our planet for years. The technology they have is far beyond anything we can imagine, and they won't hesitate to destroy us if we don't act now." The room was silent. Reed could see the skepticism in their eyes. He knew it wasn't easy to believe in something so far-fetched. But he had seen the evidence. He had felt the power growing inside him. And now he had to convince them. "Lyra," Reed said, motioning to her. "She's not from Earth. She's part of a race called the Icorians. They'd been watching us, preparing us for what's coming. She's been training me, showing me how to fight, how to lead." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And I'm telling you, we are not helpless. We can fight back, but we need to act together. We need to unite the world, form alliances with other races, and prepare ourselves for what's ahead." The room remained quiet for a moment longer. Then one of the military leaders, a seasoned officer named General Calloway, spoke up. "This is insane," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "There's no evidence, no proof. This sounds like a hoax. Reed, you expect us to believe in alien invaders?" Reed felt a pang of frustration, but he didn't back down. Another person, a tech expert named Rachel, stepped forward. "I've been going through Reed's data. There's something happening. We're picking up unusual signals, anomalies in the atmosphere that can't be explained by anything we know. It's not a hoax. Something's out there, and we need to prepare for it." The tension in the room shifted. The skepticism was still there, But now, there was something else, a sense of urgency. Slowly, one by one, the group began to nod in agreement. They were starting to believe. Reed could see it in their eyes. It was a small victory, but it was enough to build on. He wasn't alone in this. He had allies. Together, they could do this. They could unite Earth, and they could stop the Orlok. Reed looked at Lyra, who was standing in the corner, watching him. He could see the faintest smile on her face. She knew this was just the beginning. But it was a start. The war for Earth was coming, and Reed was ready to lead the charge. Reed sat in the dimly lit command center, staring at the large map of Earth on the wall. His fingers drummed nervously on the edge of the table. The situation was growing more dire by the day. The small group of allies he had gathered was starting to grow, but the Orlok were still a mystery. They had made no official move, but Reed could feel their presence looming, like a storm waiting to break. Lyra was beside him, her face calm, but her eyes betraying the weight of what was to come. She had been with him every step of the way, helping him train and guiding him through the complexities of leadership, but even she knew they were running out of time. "We need more than just Earth's forces," Reed said, his voice a mix of frustration and determination. He had spoken to leaders from different countries, shared what he could, and tried to get them on board with the cause. But it wasn't enough. Earth's military resources were scattered, and most governments still refused to believe the danger. If we're going to survive, we need to unite the human race. We need to make sure everyone knows the truth. Lyra nodded slowly, her fingers gently tracing the glowing surface of the device she had given him. "You're right. The Orlok are patient, Reed. They won't strike until they're sure we're too divided to fight back. But if we can show humanity that they're not alone, that they're part of something larger, it could change everything." Reed looked at her, considering her words. They had trained for months, preparing as much as possible. But no amount of training could replace the need for unity, for belief. If they were going to succeed, they needed to inspire hope, something that was increasingly difficult to find in a world so skeptical of the unknown. "How do we do that?" Reed asked, his voice low. "How do we convince people who don't believe in anything, let alone alien invasions?" "We start small," Lyra said with conviction. "We can't change the whole world overnight, but we can make people see the truth. We can start with the cities, the people who are open to the possibility. We need to create alliances with other species who've had to fight the Orlok before. The Icorians aren't the only ones who faced them. We have friends, Reed. Aliens who are willing to help." Reed's mind raced as Lyra spoke. Allies from other species. It seemed like a dream. But in his heart, he knew she was right. The power that had awakened in him wasn't just the key to saving Earth. It was a bridge to the stars. The technology in his hands could help him connect with others who had fought the same battles, who had witnessed the destruction the Orlok could cause. Reed could lead them all, but only if he could inspire them to work together. "We'll start by reaching out to them," Reed said, more to himself than to Lyra. "We'll send signals, build trust, and share our knowledge. The Orlok might be strong, but they won't be able to fight an entire galaxy united against them." The weeks that followed were a blur of action. Reed worked tirelessly, contacting experts and allies, setting up covert meetings with representatives from alien species that Lyra had reached out to. It wasn't easy. Many of the species Reed met were skeptical, just like the people on Earth. They had their own histories with the Orlok, painful, bloody histories that left scars deeper than the stars themselves. Some were willing to help, others were cautious. But with each new ally, Reed felt the strength of his plan growing. He was no longer just a man with a device. He was a leader uniting a resistance against a force that threatened everything. One evening, as Reed sat in the command center, staring at the new data that had just come in, Lyra approached him. Her face was more serious than usual, her brow furrowed in concern. "Reed," she said softly, "I've been getting strange readings from the Orlok ships. They're getting closer, faster than we thought. Reed's heart skipped a beat. The tension in the room thickened. How soon? He asked, his voice sharp. Sooner than we expected, Lyra replied, her voice barely a whisper. We're running out of time. Reed knew that this was it. This was the moment they had been preparing for, and there was no turning back now. The resistance they had been building, the alliances with other species, they were all going to be tested in the coming days. The Orlok would not wait. They had to be ready. He stood up, his resolve hardening. It's time. We fight now. No more waiting. He turned to the gathered group of allies in the room, each one with their own reasons for being there, their own pasts, their own fears. We unite. We stand together. And we show the Orlok that Earth will not fall. Reed's heart pounded in his chest as the countdown on the screen ticked down to 0. The moment had come. The first wave of Orlok ships had entered the Earth's atmosphere, and the resistance was ready. He stood in the command center with Lyra at his side, the team of human and alien allies buzzing with anticipation. Their mission was clear. They had to stop the Orlok's advance and send a message that Earth would not fall without a fight. But Reed couldn't shake the sense of urgency gnawing at him. They didn't know how many ships the Orlok had, or what they were truly capable of. All they knew was that the first attack would be critical. Are you ready? Lyra asked, her voice calm despite the tension in the room. Her gaze was steady, as always, but Reed could see the slight furrow in her brow. She knew as well as he did that they were up against an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. Reed nodded, swallowing his nerves. He wasn't just leading this fight for himself. He was leading it for every person on Earth, for every soul who didn't yet understand the danger they were in. This was their only shot. Let's do it, he said, his voice steady, though his mind raced. He could feel the power coursing through him now, stronger than ever before. It was like an energy that had been waiting, growing in anticipation, ready to be unleashed. But he had learned from Lyra that raw power alone wouldn't win this war. Strategy, unity, and heart were what would make the difference. The first blast hit a city in Europe, sending shockwaves through the room. A bright light flared up on the map as the Orlok's ships descended, firing upon Earth's defenses. The resistance had anticipated this, and the counterattacks were immediate. Reed watched as the human military, equipped with new technology, thanks to the allies they'd made, launched their own assault. The battle was already underway. Reed turned to Lyra, his expression grim. We need to hit them hard. The longer we wait, the more cities they'll destroy. We will, Lyra replied. But we can't forget to think long term. The Orlok won't fall easily. We need to break their command structure, weaken their will to fight. That's our true goal. Reed's eyes hardened with determination. Lyra was right. This wasn't just about surviving the first wave. It was about crippling their enemy's strength. He quickly relayed new orders to his team, directing them to focus on key Orlok ships that seemed to be leading the attack. The resistance fighters were already out there, scattered across Earth's major cities, but they had to coordinate more effectively if they wanted a chance to win. In the heat of the battle, Reed's mind flashed back to the training sessions with Lyra, the long hours where she taught him to focus, to center his thoughts, and to harness the power within. Now, he needed that power more than ever. His hand hovered over the device Lyra had given him, the one that connected him to the energy of the Icorians and the galaxy beyond. He had learned to channel the power, but he wasn't sure how far it could take him. Was he strong enough to face the Orlok's might? As if on cue, Lyra spoke. Reed, you have the strength. Don't doubt it. The key to the power isn't in controlling it. It's in trusting it. The words echoed in Reed's mind as he raised the device high. A surge of energy coursed through his body, the same energy he had been training to use. He felt it connect with the Earth's defenses, the military efforts, the will of his allies. It was as if everything and everyone was linked together in one unified pulse. The resistance was more than just a group of individuals. They were one force, one heart, beating as one. A massive wave of energy shot out from Reed, his focus sharp and unwavering. The Orlok ships that had been advancing faltered, their shields weakening in the face of his attack. Reed could feel the tension in the air as the ships began to retreat. The Orlok weren't backing down, but they were stumbling. This was the break they needed. "We're doing it," Reed breathed, his voice filled with disbelief. But the moment of relief was short-lived. As the Orlok ships retreated, more arrived, larger, more menacing, and far more powerful. The first wave had only been a distraction, a feint to test Earth's defenses. Reed's mind raced. They had made progress, but it wasn't over. The real battle was just beginning. "Stay focused," Lyra urged, stepping beside him. "This is only the start. You've shown them what we're capable of. Now we have to finish this." Reed nodded, his resolve hardening once more. The Orlok had underestimated them, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. Earth was ready for this fight. He turned to his allies, his team, his friends. The war wasn't just about fighting an alien empire. It was about showing the universe that Earth would not be an easy target. This was their home, and they would fight to protect it. Reed stood at the front lines, watching the sky darken with the shadow of more Orlok ships. The first wave had been only a small taste of what was to come, and the second wave had proven to be even more ruthless. As the Orlok began to regroup, Reed's heart raced. He had known it would get harder, but he hadn't expected the sheer size of the enemy forces to be so overwhelming. The air around him crackled with energy from the battle, but despite the odds, he couldn't let fear take over. He had learned from Lyra that it was in moments like this, when everything seemed lost, that true strength revealed itself. "We're running out of time," said Lyra, her voice calm but with a noticeable edge of urgency. She stood beside him, her eyes scanning the sky. She had been at his side since the beginning, helping to guide him, but even Lyra seemed to feel the growing pressure. The resistance had been pushing hard, but the Orlok were relentless. Reed turned to face her, his mind spinning with possibilities. "How many more do you think are coming?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "Too many," Lyra replied, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the battlefield. "They're preparing for a full-scale invasion. Earth might not survive this unless we do something drastic." Reed clenched his fists, the weight of his responsibility heavy on his shoulders. He had fought for months to prepare humanity for this moment, and now it seemed like the battle might be slipping out of their hands. But he wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't afford to. "We still have a chance," Reed said, turning back toward the group of resistance fighters who had gathered around the command center. His voice rang with determination, even though doubt gnawed at him from the inside. "We can't let them get any closer. We'll push them back, one strike at a time. We have the power, we have the will. They might have the numbers, but we have the heart of Earth behind us, and that's something they can't take." Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and signaled to their allies. The battle was shifting, the Orlok pushing harder, but the resistance wasn't backing down. They couldn't afford to. Reed took a deep breath, focusing on the device Lyra had given him. He had become one with it over the past few months. His connection to the energy, the power, had deepened. He could feel the surge of it, pulsing through him like the heartbeat of the Earth itself. He was no longer just a man fighting an alien invasion. He was a symbol of humanity's defiance, its unwillingness to bow to any enemy, no matter how powerful. "Now," Reed muttered to himself, drawing upon every ounce of energy he had. The power surged within him, a storm that he had learned to control over time. He raised the device above his head, letting the energy crackle around him like lightning. A blinding pulse of light shot from his hands, reaching the nearest Orlok ships. The impact was immediate. One of their lead ships exploded in a burst of fire, the others faltering as their shields weakened. Reed felt the satisfaction of the victory, but he knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. "We need more," Reed called out to the group, his voice determined. "Gather all our resources. We have to hit them hard, now, before they can regroup. They won't stop until we're destroyed, but we can stop them." Lyra moved to his side, her expression intense. "This will push you to your limits, Reed. You need to be careful." "I don't have time to be careful," he replied, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy. "We need to win this now, or we lose everything." The team around him began to mobilize, each of them moving with purpose. Reed could see the fire in their eyes. This was their fight, their home, and they were willing to give everything to protect it. They had all seen the truth. Earth was not just a blue planet in the vastness of space. It was their home. It was their last stand. As the battle raged on, Reed could feel the Orlok pulling back, their forces weakening under the pressure of the human resistance. But he knew they would regroup. This wasn't over. He had to keep pushing, keep fighting, or the victory they had worked so hard for would slip away. The sky lit up with another explosion, and Reed's heart skipped a beat. A part of him wanted to stop, to breathe. But the war was far from won. He looked at Lyra, whose face was unreadable but resolute. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Reed raised his device once more, focusing his energy, preparing for the next strike. The fight for Earth was only beginning, but he would give everything to see it through to the end. The final hours of the battle were the hardest Reed had ever faced. The Orlok were relentless, their ships coming in waves, each larger and more powerful than the last. Earth's defenses were stretched thin, but the resistance fighters, led by Reed and Lyra, fought back with everything they had. Reed could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him, the lives of millions of people, the survival of Earth itself, all resting on the edge of a knife. Every decision, every move they made, could be the difference between victory and total annihilation. He stood at the front, his hand firmly gripping the device Lyra had given him. The energy within it had been with him since the beginning, but now it was reaching new levels of power. It surged through him, a living, breathing force that connected him to the entire planet. But even with the power at his fingertips, Reed knew they couldn't do it alone. They had to stay united, rely on each other, and push beyond their limits. "Reed, we need to move faster," Lyra shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Her face was streaked with dirt and sweat, but her eyes were clear, her resolve as strong as ever. She had been beside him every step of the way, and he knew she wasn't about to back down now. He nodded, his breath steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The resistance fighters were making their final push, taking out the Orlok ships one by one. The energy from Reed's device was disrupting their shields, leaving them vulnerable. But the Orlok weren't going to go down without a fight. Their ships continued to fire, launching waves of missiles and laser blasts that threatened to overwhelm the Earth's defenses. "We need a plan," Reed said, his mind racing. The pressure of the situation had never been more real. The Orlok had underestimated the will of humanity, but they were learning fast. The fight was far from over, and Reed knew that if they didn't act quickly, Earth would fall. "We have to strike at their core," Lyra replied. "If we can take out their command ship, we'll break their coordination. The rest of their fleet will scatter." Reed looked out over the battlefield, his heart pounding. He could see the massive Orlok command ship hovering in the distance, protected by a dozen smaller ships. It was their last hope, their final target. If they could destroy that ship, the Orlok would lose their ability to organize, and the fight would be. As the final wave of resistance fighters assembled, Reed felt the power from the device coursing through his veins. The energy was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for. Earth, humanity, the hope of survival. It all rested on their success. Reed could feel the weight of it all, but he wasn't afraid. This was their moment. This was the time to show the universe that Earth would not fall without a fight. The group moved swiftly, navigating through the chaos of the battlefield. The Orlok ships loomed overhead, their weapons blazing, but the resistance fighters pushed forward, determined to reach their target. Reed felt the energy inside him flare as he focused on the command ship, his mind locking onto it with precision. Lyra was beside him, her own strength and power a steady presence. Together, they would strike. "Ready?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, but filled with anticipation. Reed nodded. Now or never. With a final surge of power, Reed raised the device and unleashed a massive pulse of energy. The blast shot forward, tearing through the air, and struck the Orlok command ship with a deafening explosion. For a moment, everything was still. Reed held his breath, waiting for the outcome. Then, the ship began to crumble. The Orlok's shields flickered and failed, and the entire fleet lost its coordination. One by one, the remaining ships began to fall, their weapons useless without the command ship to guide them. The Orlok were retreating, scattering into the vastness of space. "We did it," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with awe. The battle was over. Reed exhaled, feeling the weight of the past hours lift off his shoulders. They had won. Earth had been saved. But as he looked around at the wreckage of the battlefield, he knew that this victory came at a cost. Many had fallen, and the scars of the war would remain. But they had shown the universe that Earth was not a world to be conquered. It was a world that would rise, fight, and survive, no matter the odds. Reed turned to Lyra, a smile spreading across his face. "We did it. We saved Earth." Lyra smiled back, her eyes proud. "This is just the beginning. Together, we can build a future where humanity stands tall among the stars." As the sun began to rise over the horizon, Reed knew that this was only the first chapter of a new story for Earth. The war was over, but their journey had only just begun. The universe was waiting, and humanity was ready to step into it with newfound strength and unity.